Good evening or afternoon or morning or whenever they present this thing. My name is Adrian Nathan West. I'm a writer and translator. I'm here to present a panel on madness in society. We're fortunate to have three authors with us this evening, Eva Baltasar, Beatriz Bracher, and Benjamin Labatut. Eva Baltasar has published 10 volumes of poetry to widespread acclaim. Her debut novel, Permafrost, received the 2018 Beatriz Bracher from the Catalan Booksellers Association, was shortlisted for France's 2020 Prix Medici for the best foreign book. It is her first novel in a triptych, which aims to explore the universes of three different women in the first person. The author lives a simple life with her two daughters in a village in the mountains. Beatriz Bracher, born in Sao Paulo in 1961, is a graduate in literature, and with partners, she founded the publishing house Editora 34, where she worked for 8 years. While working on her new book and as a consultant for a small publishing house that publishes Brazilian documents, she is collaborating with NGOs to resist the current Brazilian government. She is an editor, screenwriter, and the author of 6 works of fiction, and has won 3 of Brazil's most prestigious literary awards, the Clarice Lispector Prize, the Rio Prize, and the Sao Paulo Prize. Benjamin Labatut was born in Rotterdam in 1980, grew up in The Hague, and currently lives with his family in Santiago de Chile. When We Cease to Understand the World, his first book to be translated into English by me, delves into the lives of physicists, chemists, and mathematicians who have radically changed our worldview. It has been translated into 24 languages, shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, longlisted for the National Book Award, and was included by President Obama in his 2021 summer reading list. So the subject of our event this evening is writing in madness, and we'll start with a general question for everyone. What is madness? And whoever wants to go first can go first.
Bueno, empiezo, si os parece bien. ¿Qué es la locura? Preguntas, Nate, ¿verdad?
Sí, sí.
Bueno, para mí la locura es vivir con normalidad en la sociedad que tenemos. Eso es estar completamente loco, creo yo, ¿no? Digamos que es lo que expreso también con la protagonista de mi libro, de Permafrost, que su visión es esta, la locura de los que están en el exterior.
Mm-hmm. De los que están en el exterior. So, yeah, so, you know, the madness is living normality in a crazy life. In the case of the narrator of Permafrost. And yeah, so, ¿cuál era lo último? Perdona, es que no estoy acostumbrada a hacer de intérprete.
Sí, claro, no hay problema. Para la protagonista, digamos, los locos son los otros, los que
claro.
Se medican para seguir funcionando en sociedad.
Okay, perdón. So she said for the protagonist, the crazy people are the other people, the people who have to medicate themselves to lead a normal life. And Beatriz.
Okay, I will try to speak English, but
sure.
If you cannot understand me, I can speak. Well, I think madness is a state that you have no connection with the reality. And where you are odd with yourself or with the world, or the world is this in relation to you. And this could be cultural or ideological, something like that. But the madness that interests me in my book is the one who takes us whole. And the one who born inside us and grow up and hurting a lot.
Sure.
And so this conflict between reality, society, and the person could be the trigger to this madness. But once the madness is inside us, is something really bad.
Okay, sure. What about you, Benjamin?
Well, I think madness has always fascinated me since I was a very young boy. I feel that as a child I was a little bit mad, not enough to be a worry to my parents, but I had this relationship with the world that I think a lot of creative people have, where it was just. And when my brain started maturing and I lost that sort of magical relationship to the world, it felt like a very profound loss. So my interest in madness is sort of has to do with that, recovering that strange world. No, I think because what fascinates me is that it presents a different sense of the world, one that's savage and unconstrained. It's a kind of terrible freedom, and if it becomes clinical, it is, I think, the worst of all fates. But a touch of madness is like a constant reminder that reality, this seemingly solid experience that we all have, can be twisted and bent and even broken. And there's a great power there, and it sort of points at the heart of what is most wonderful about us.
Sure. So to continue, I have a question for you, Benjamin. Your book narrates moments in the lives of people for whom sanity, insanity, and insights cannot easily be disentangled. In the case of a person whose extraordinary visions change our perception of reality, and this is the case for many of the people who are the protagonists of your book, when and how does it make sense to speak of madness? You know, if you have a kind of madness that drives you to extraordinary insight, is this madness? Is this something else?
I think there's madness can be sort of thought of as a very dangerous material that bubbles up to the surface in certain human beings, and when it's fresh, it's like lava. It can burn you. It can destroy you. There's a very harmful aspect of it because it carries great power. But I think that these really strange ideas that at first appear as complete madness, as they interact with the human psyche, as they are brought to light, they kind of cool down and become manageable, because there are so many things that we consider mad and that then become commonplace reality, even accepted knowledge. So I think that people who are sort of probing the edges of rationality tend to rub up against these things, and I think we should pay attention to the ideas because they come from a very deep, dark place, but they do become, much in the sense that lava then becomes the rock that we step on. We shouldn't discard them. We should just be very careful and handle them with care, because it's a wealth of mental material as well. Even if it retains part of the energy and the heat that makes it so destructive at first. I don't think we can survive really without the mad dreams of reason.
Sure. So Eva, my next question is for you, because I've read all of your books quite recently, and yours stands out quite a bit from the group for treating insanity or mental illness or whatever you want to call it as being humorous. You know, it's being, I don't want to say light, but even when your narrator is thinking about suicide, it's quite funny, you know, and there are parts that make a reader laugh. Do you think that there's a lighter side to being crazy?
Vale, entendí. Todo menos la última pregunta, ¿qué es?
No, lo último es que si hay una parte ligera de la locura, o sea, algo, porque en el libro sí que da un poco de risa, o sea, es muy graciosa a veces la narradora cuando habla de la locura, incluso de suicidio.
Sí, claro, ella tiene esas fabulaciones suicidas que tienen un componente estético también, y es cierto que usa la ironía un poco como arma de supervivencia también, porque si no, no sabemos si se suicida o no, pero si no en el primer capítulo ya se hubiera tirado del edificio donde está, ¿no? Entonces, es esta forma de pasar por la vida yo creo en el fondo que sí que es ligera y que debería estar llena de humor, hay esta mirada irónica que se puede leer como cínica, pero que se puede leer también como sencilla. Las cosas siempre están interpretadas y ella hace esta interpretación con la que consigue un poco irse salvando, que es la del humor, la de la ironía, claro.
Sí. Vale. So she was saying this is true in the case of her narrator. Her narrator has, you know, what we call suicidal ideations and these types of things. And there's even a kind of aesthetic madness in the book. But her ironic attitude serves as a weapon defend herself and to survive. In the first chapter, for example, she's going to throw herself off a building, and then these things come up, and then she ends up just forgetting to throw herself off of the building. And so she says, you know, that there is a light side of this, there is a humor to it, and her character has a point of view which is ironic and which is in a way cynical, but what can also be seen as something simple and a way of saving yourself through madness. Okay. Beatriz, in your novel, you write of Theo. This is one of the figures whose past is being interrogated. And you say he drew relationships between the material from which a fingernail is made and the material from trees that's used to make paper, and the process of creating the chemical element from silver that affixes the image of the person whose fingernail it is to the paper made from the bark of trees in the presence of sunlight and of the observer who snaps the photo. And this is something quite interesting when you describe Theo and when you describe madness in general, this need to make these connections, to perceive and grasp patterns, which is interesting because it emerges from insanity, but is also kind of a way to attempt to reestablish sanity. And I'm curious if you have a perspective on the relationship between those two and this idea of building patterns and encompassing things in patterns.
Well, I think I'm not an expert in madness, but
sure.
I think it's common people who have a mental disorder try to create or to see patterns in the world, in the reality around them, and sometimes they did very beautiful patterns. They made it. They see it, and it's more or less like science that is just trying to find patterns in the way the nature works. But the problem, I think, with the one who have mental problems and is in a crisis, a mental crisis, is that in general, he's not open to debate ideas, to debate what he's seeing, and is something very, he's very alone. He stayed very alone and put us outside of his world.
Sure.
And so I believe always the people I know that have problem, always they made it. They try to put everything together and explain it with a pattern. Is a way to organize the world to not be so painful, but that put everyone outside this world.
Sure. Okay. Eva, I was going to ask you another question which relates to the one that you had before. Your narrator has a very difficult time fitting into the society around her. So she bounces from place to place. She's looking everywhere for work. She contemplates suicide. And there was something that occurred to me at one point in the book, which is this phrase of Artaud, the French writer, when he talks about Van Gogh, and he doesn't say, you know, that Van Gogh committed suicide. He says, Van Gogh was an artist suicided by society. And since you've mentioned this idea of the madness of society, I'm curious if you'd like to talk a little bit more about the particular craziness of society in your work.
Vale, ¿me puedes traducir todo?
Vale, perfecto, sí. Básicamente, yo no sé si conoces este ensayo de Artaud, que es Van Gogh, el artista suicidado por la sociedad. Y es un concepto que me interesa porque solemos pensar en el suicidio como un acto de un individuo, pero Artaud dice, no, es la sociedad francesa la que ha matado a Van Gogh. Y me interesa en el caso de tu protagonista porque es una persona que sufre la sociedad. Y me interesa saber un poco más de tus ideas sobre la locura en la sociedad.
Sí, claro, yo coincido totalmente, ¿no? Esa sería la idea. La protagonista circula un poco por los límites, ¿no? Por la periferia. Ella es hay quien ha dicho, es un poco outsider, porque ella lo que vive esa incomodidad de estar en la sociedad que le ha tocado. Está rodeada de personajes como la madre, la hermana, que se medican para ser felices, para ir tirando, para estar bien, para seguir funcionando. Ella lo que quiere es mantener la lucidez sobre esta realidad. Por eso no se medica y por eso es capaz de estar muy lúcida cuando está gozando, porque es un libro donde hay sexo, hay el amor por el arte, por la literatura, pero a la vez esto la lleva a sufrir realmente, es víctima de esta sociedad y en momentos en que el sufrimiento dado por esta especie de vacío existencial que creo que existe y que es muy generalizado, hace que la lleve a tener esas fabulaciones suicidas, hace que la acerque a la locura.
Sí, sí. So, she said she agreed when I made the mention of Artaud's famous essay about Van Gogh. And so her protagonist, this person who lives in the periphery, a person who lives at certain limits, is an outsider. And so she's extremely uncomfortable with the society that she lives in, which in the book is embodied in the figure of her sister who has a baby in the book, and also her mother. So these are people who, in a certain sense, are well adjusted to society, but at the same time, they're constantly taking drugs, or rather medication, in order to endure it and in order to be happy. Whereas the narrator, who is actually suffering from depression, suffering even from suicidal thoughts, her mission really is to maintain her lucidity and to maintain a clear perspective on this society. So she's a person, who has these experiences that can be indulgent. She has sex and things like this, but at the same time, she's suffering the society as a victim. So, Benjamin, I'm curious about, and we've talked about this before, a major figure in your book, of course, is the French mathematician Alexander Grothendieck, arguably the greatest mathematician of the 20th century. And his life veered into activism, into reclusion, and at the end, he even seemed to renounce a great deal of his work. And when we have a figure like this, somebody who sees so many things that we don't see, but who at the same time seems like a total nutcase, are we bound to take seriously his contentions about, in his words, the horrible consequences of mathematics itself, which was what he worked in? As I say, when to all appearances, he's lost it.
Yes, I think we should take him seriously, especially in these days where I believe that madness is sort of coming back into the world with a greater force than before. It's not something that we can avoid. And I'm not just talking about, I think we can all feel it, no? Reality is taking a shape, a strange shape. It has a texture that seems unreal. So I believe that it is to everybody's benefit to consider certain mechanisms of madness and paranoia, not just in their, we sort of have to guard ourselves against it by treading towards it very carefully. No, I think we should, in these things, we should seek to experience passing madnesses. No, there are many ways in which you can put your own vision of the world under stress, and you begin to see the cracks that it has, because it is through those cracks, and we all have worldviews that have these holes, these blind spots. And through those blind spots, new things come into the world, and through them we can also be infected by very dangerous ideas. I think it's very, Grothendieck is an outlier, but normal common people have the weirdest beliefs. I include myself in this now. And when you start to look at those things closely, how the mechanisms of belief take place, how you can be infected by a highly irrational thought, it can change your life in a second. I think we have to sort of have some natural immunity to that. And people who are very confident about their own sanity, or who have never ever had an experience that has taken them out of themselves, they have no protection against that. They're waiting around for someone to come and infect them with a tiny little thought that can grow and can take over your whole mind. So I think we should, these cases are spectacular because sort of genius and madness meet, but in our everyday lives, we have to sort of have some training to deal with this.
Yeah, this is something that's actually occurred to me a lot lately, over the past year or the past 2 years, because as I've observed political developments, and then of course as I've observed the pandemic, what is driven home to me constantly is people's incapability of thinking of these phenomena outside of whatever framework they've adopted beforehand. And I'm not really a great hippie type, but increasingly I've been saying, you know, everybody has to take LSD. This is what I think now. Everybody has to take it because I can't figure out another way for people to break out of these thought patterns they have. That's just my private proselytizing for LSD, everybody. Now, I'm curious, Beatriz, this is really a sort of elementary question. I think it's the kind of question sometimes you would say, well, why is this reader so dumb that he's asking something so basic? But I guess I am that dumb reader. And so I read your book and I wanted to know, it's named for a character who does not appear physically in the novel. And in fact, you only read his name 3 times, I believe, in it. So I'm curious, why does the novel have his name?
Well, Antonio is the name of the novel and the name of the unborn child, the Benjamin's son. And yeah. Benjamin is the one, like the Benjamin here, he is the one who provoked all the stories we are reading, because he will be a father, he will start a new family. He decided to know about his own family, his father's family, and then he went and talk with 3 people that tell him the history of his father. So Antonio is the motor of the story, because of him, Benjamin decided to know about his own family. But there is a story that is funny, that is interesting. When I was working with my editor with this text, I was not happy with the title I created, and I was impossible to decide about the title. One day he said, I think the book will call Antonio. Antonio is the best title to the book. And I first, but why? There are no character that's named Antonio in the book. And then he said, I don't know why. I think you have to find one Antonio in your book, because the book will the title will be Antonio. I think it's the best one. Yeah. And I thought it was so unexpected, this, and so crazy, but he was so confident that Antonio is the best title for the book that I think, oh, okay, it will be Antonio, but now I have to create an Antonio in the book. And then I imagined that the unborn child could be called Antonio, and I think this was very, very good for the book and changed, because all the times you were thinking about the motivation, why Benjamin is asking for the people, the history of the father. So it's the beginning and it is the end, because it's a family history. And Antonio will be the continuation of the history, for the good and for the bad. And so this is the reason. Okay.
Eva, I wanted to ask, I'm curious, because in Permafrost, you have the account of a young woman who is struggling with many things, but among those things, mental problems. But in your earlier book, Al Camí de las Flores, you have a psychologist, so a little bit sort of the other end. And I'm curious about what it's like for you as a writer, looking at it from these 2 different perspectives, 2 opposite perspectives, or maybe not opposite. I don't know your opinion.
¿Me traduces, por favor?
Sí, claro. Que en el libro anterior, o sea, en este libro, la narradora es una persona con problemas de varios tipos, pero ciertamente con problemas mentales. Y en el libro El Camí de las Flores es un libro sobre una psicóloga. O sea, que tiene una perspectiva obviamente distinta, tal vez contraria. No sé si estás de acuerdo o no, pero tenía curiosidad por saber por qué esas 2 perspectivas tan diferentes sobre lo que podría ser interpretada como la misma problemática.
Sí, bueno, no sé, el camino de las flores fue una especie de experimento raro que quedó ahí como... Y lo que sí que es cierto es que en el origen de Permafrost está en una visita que yo misma hice a una psicóloga, ¿no? Es decir, en un momento de mi vida tenía o creía que tenía, y por eso mismo los tenía, problemas existenciales. No tenía amigos con quien hablar, no sabía dónde ir, fui a la psicóloga y tras una primera visita donde estuve contando mi infancia, ella me dijo, mire usted, la veo muy desestructurada, lo que vas a hacer es ir a casa y en 4 páginas escribes tu propia biografía, así tú te estructurarás y también me servirá a mí para estructurarme e iniciar una terapia. Entonces yo consideré que era un ejercicio muy fácil, empecé a escribir y me di cuenta de 3 cosas. La primera, que me resultaba muy aburrido contar mi propia vida. La segunda, que empezaba a fabular, ¿no? Es decir, mentiras para hacer más interesante la lectura a la psicóloga. La intención era darle un texto que fuera realmente interesante, ¿no? Lo que me pareció un ejercicio, bueno, tenía mucha curiosidad por llevarlo adelante. Finalmente hice un ejercicio de respirar y lo dejé ahí. Pero había descubierto una voz que me sedujo mucho, que era la voz de Permafrost, de esta mujer que no es psicóloga, ¿no? Pero que está contando su vida en primera persona y está fabulando ya a partir de la mía. Y ese fue la semilla un poco y el origen. Y me sirvió también para poder dejar, o sea, no fui nunca más a la psicóloga. Y creo que es uno de los aspectos catárticos que puede tener tanto la lectura como la escritura, pero en este caso lo ha tenido, ¿no? Para mí.
Bueno. So she said it's funny because this actually relates in a sense to the origin of Permafrost, that Eva herself, in a moment of existential difficulties in her life, paid a visit to a psychologist, and the woman said, well, you know, this is very disordered, and something that I would like you to do as an exercise is you know, write down something about your past. So she had been talking about her past, and she said, well, I learned 3 lessons from this. One is that talking about myself is boring. 2 is that she started to make things up, which was a natural reaction to the first. And she had a certain curiosity to keep going with that. And then the 3rd was that she discovered a voice. And she wanted to follow that voice also and see where it led. She said she did not go back to a psychologist, but it was a cathartic experience, and it's related to the cathartic experiences that one can have when reading and writing. So Benjamin, your new book is entitled The Stone of Madness. Can you tell us a little bit about it and how it relates to When We Cease to Understand the World?
Yeah, it relates rather directly because it's also an examination of the limits of thought. And in this case, what I try to do is write a little bit about a strange new madness or a strangeness that we're all beginning to feel, something that's creeping into experience and that's making us continuously wonder if what we feel, read, see, and hear is real. I think this has become urgent. It's something that's been incubating for a long time, like all great changes, but it's exploding right now. And what I do, these are 2 texts, 2 essays. In one of them, I weave together ideas from Lovecraft, from David Hilbert, a mathematician, and from Philip K. Dick, because Lovecraft sort of gives an idea of this ancient pre-modern horror that's coming up to the surface. Hilbert represents the project, failed and successful, of trying to dominate reality with mathematics. And Philip K. Dick is one of my favorite writers. He had this well-known deranged enlightenment. And in his books, I think you can see an anticipation of what we're all experiencing right now. In the second text, I speak about this painting by Hieronymus Bosch called The Extraction of the Stone of Madness. It's in the El Prado Museum, and it's a surgeon removing a tulip from someone's forehead because they used to believe that madness grew like a stone inside us. And actually that's quite funny, because that text came out of an email that someone who is undoubtedly paranoid wrote to you as my translator. Yes. And it was so wonderful. I went down the rabbit hole of her ideas, and while it's kind of scary, because when madness reaches out towards you, you feel vulnerable, and yet I felt that she's doing something that we're all trying to do right now, which is make sense of a world that is falling apart.
Sure.
So in that second test, it's really, the question is, can we ever extract the stone of madness? And I have to say that I don't think we can, because we'd be cutting off such an important part of ourselves.
Sure. If I will, for viewers, tell the story very quickly. So I one day checked my email, and I had an email through my website that said something to the effect of, I'm writing to you because I think that you're involved in a conspiracy. And probably you don't know that you're involved, but I was given your name by, and this was the phrase, someone else who worked for the same security-oriented organization as you. I've never worked, I don't know what that is, but I've never worked for one so far as I know. And it said, and I believe that you, as a sort of fake translator, have been tricked into writing novels that are then being sold on the dark web to other authors and so on and so forth. So yes,
bought by rich Chileans like me who want to impress their girlfriends and family.
Exactly. And actually, I sort of wish it were true, because it sounds more interesting than what I'm doing right now. But so it goes. I'm going to draw this to a close a bit, because we want to have a bit of a reading from all of the texts from the three of you. So if you like, Beatriz, you can begin.
The one who is talking is Isabel. That's the grandmother of Benjamin, who is the one who is hearing her. I don't know how much you remember of that period in your father's madness. He, who was always so beautiful, became skeletal, his face sunken in. I missed Xavier, but I don't know if he could have handled it. It wasn't easy, Benjamin. It wasn't an easy decision to have him locked up. Enrique helped me with everything, and Haroldo too, against Raul's wishes. I know that he was angry with Haroldo and felt guilt that he couldn't stick things out with Theo, but he shouldn't have felt anger or guilt. At the time, there was nothing else to be done. Trying to help someone who doesn't want to be helped is the most difficult thing in the world. Now that you are an adult, about to have your first son, you seem ready to listen. In those days and afterward, with everything that happened, you lived with me in my apartment like it was just a room in some boarding house. Yes, I know. In the end, it was good for you to move out into a real boarding house. You always wanted to be from Minas. You never gave that up. I know, Benjamin. I know that you are from Minas, but you know what I mean. I'm talking about the responsibility to be who you are. You are from this family, so you are this family. Your father wanted to be rid of all that and cheat himself along with it. The history that he crafted for himself in Minas was a non-history. He went too deep. By the time I brought him back, there was nothing left to hold on to. No handle I could use to hoist him back out. Only damaged pieces. You survived just fine. You grew up drinking milk fresh from the cow, catching birds. You enjoyed the simple rural lifestyle that befalls a field hand son. You were raised by the kindness of those women in the hidden space of that big plantation house, on that dark cot belonging to your father, a servant in the brickyard of that yes sir world. You rejected the new atmosphere I offered you. You wanted to say yes, ma'am, to me, and I wouldn't have it. No, Benjamin, you were never rude to me. On the contrary, we had perfect manners. You have perfect manners. We were locked in a battle between different rubrics of politeness. Nobody won, nobody lost, and there was no truce. That's where we left it. Now that you are back, handsome as always, soon to be father, you need to understand something that was always here between us and will also be with your son. You probably never meet my great-grandson, little Antonio, but you will doubtless recognize me in him, your father too. That's why you came. That's why you need to understand. This search has nothing to do with your mother. She was never from here. I have nothing to say about her, but I can tell you about your father, and we can each talk about ourselves, about how you were before you reached adolescence, about that clever and lively boy with shining eyes, about me, and how I dragged a man from the abyss, the man who would never again be my prodigal son. During that time, your father was still with us, with all the comings and goings from the clinic, and with me still finished my tenure file. You became a little ghost, tiptoeing throughout the house and hiding in the corners. Maybe you don't believe it, but I worried about you. I worried a lot.
Yes. Thank you very much. Benjamin.
This is about Alexander Grothendieck, who we mentioned before, the mathematician. What stimulates me is not ambition or the thirst for power. It is the acute perception of something immense and yet very delicate at the same time, he said. Grothendieck continued to push past the limits of abstraction. No sooner had he conquered new territory than he was preparing to expand its frontiers. The pinnacle of his investigation was the concept of motive, a ray of light capable of illuminating every conceivable incarnation of a mathematical object. The heart of the heart, he called this strange entity located at the crux of the mathematical universe, of which we know nothing save its faintest glimmers. Even his closest and most loyal collaborators believed he had gone too far. Grothendieck wanted to hold the sun in the palm of his hand, uncover the secret root that could bind together countless theories that bore no apparent relation to one another. They told him his goal was unattainable and that his project sounded more like the pipe dreams of an amateur than a legitimate program for scientific exploration. He did not listen. After spending so long gazing down at the foundations of mathematics, his mind had stumbled into the abyss. At the tail end of the 60s, he traveled for 2 months to Romania, Algeria, and Vietnam to give a series of seminars. One of the colleges at which he taught in Vietnam was later bombed by American troops. 2 professors and dozens of students died. When he returned to France, he was a changed man. Influenced by the clamor of the May 68 protests all around him, he called on more than 100 students during a masterclass at the University of Orsay to renounce the vile and dangerous practice of mathematics in light of the hazards humanity was facing. It was not politicians who would destroy the planet, he told them, but scientists like them who were marching like sleepwalkers towards the apocalypse. From that day forward, he refused to participate in any maths conference that would not allow him to devote equal time to ecology and pacifism. During his talks, he gave away apples and figs grown in his garden and warned about the destructive power of science. The atoms that tore Hiroshima and Nagasaki apart were split not by the greasy fingers of a general, but by a group of physicists armed with a fistful of equations, he said. He could not stop fretting over the possible effects that his own ideas could have on the world. What new horrors would spring forth from the total comprehension that he sought? What would mankind do if it could reach the heart of the heart? In 1970, at the high point of his renowned creativity and influence, he resigned from the Institute of Advanced Scientific Studies after learning it accepted funds from the French Ministry of Defense. In the following years, he abandoned his family, disavowed his friends, repudiated his colleagues, and fled from the rest of the world. The great turning point was the term that Grothendieck used to describe the change in the direction of his life during his 40s. All at once, he found himself swept up by the spirit of the age. He became obsessed by ecology, the military-industrial complex, and nuclear proliferation. To his wife's despair, he founded a commune at home where vagabonds, professors, hippies, pacifists, thieves, nuns, and prostitutes dwelt side by side. He became intolerant of all the comforts of bourgeois life. He tore up the carpets from the floors of his house, considering superfluous adornments, and began to make his own clothing, sandals from recycled tires, trousers sewn from old burlap sacks. He stopped using his bed, instead sleeping on a door that he had torn from its hinges. He only felt at ease among the poor, the young, and the marginalized, the stateless, those without a homeland. He was generous with his possessions and gave them away without a second thought. He was generous with those of others as well. One day, one of his friends, the Chilean Cristian Mayol, arrived home with his wife after a dinner out to find his front door ajar, his windows open, the fireplace raging, and the furnace blasting. Grothendieck was naked and asleep in his bath. 2 months later, Mayol received a check for 3,000 francs from Grothendieck to cover the cost. Although in general he was caring and kind, he could suffer sudden outbreaks of violence. During a pacifist protest in Avignon, he ran towards the containment barrier and knocked out 2 policemen who were attempting to impede the march, before being beaten to a pulp by dozens of officers who dragged him unconscious to the police station. At home, his wife heard him rant and rave while locked alone in his study, long monologues in German which degenerated into screams so loud that they shook the windows, followed by episodes of mutism that could last for days.
Thank you very much. Eva, ¿tienes el texto en catalán? Yo creo que tenemos justo el tiempo si quieres hacer los dos.
Sí, tengo en catalán.
So
Sí.
what we're going to do, Eva's text is a little bit shorter. She's going to read it in Catalan and then I'll read it in English. And if I have to read it really fast, I will.
Ok, voy a leer el capítulo 3, donde la protagonista se da cuenta que está en una sociedad que ha perdido la cordura con el tema de las medidas de seguridad. Fue escrito antes de la pandemia, con lo cual se podria actualitzar un poco. Leo. Mesures de seguretat a tot arreu, més que persones, més que rates. Mesures reproduïdes sense cap lògica ni sentit. Mesures de seguretat concretades en baranes, vidres dobles antibales, senyals de prohibit el pas, cinturons, barreres, cascos, botons. Mesures actives i passives, tant se val. Poden ser genolleres, terres de goma escuma, cremalleres, condons, antiavalots, futbol. També medicació, subsidis d'atur, mesures evidents o subtils, frens electromagnètics, presons, banderoles, programes d'integració social, vestides, vàlvules, revestiments ignífugs, arnesos i mosquetons. I altra vegada medicació, gorres de cop, acompanyants, productes descremats, medicació, medicació i medicació. Un suïcida reeixit, avui en dia, és un heroi. El món és ple de desaprensius titulats en primers auxilis. Són arreu, discrets i grisos com femelles de colom, però agressius com mares. Desafien la mort dels altres amb els seus massatges cardíacs i maniobres precises de Heimlich. Són una colla de lladres. Una ja no pot ni endinyar-se un pinyol d'oliva pel tub equivocat, el fran escopir per la força, encara que t'hagin de partir les costelles i perforar un pulmó. Tot a tu fet un vòmit de dry martini i el pinyol d'oliva projectat com un trofeu cap a un racó. Morir en un racó estaria bé. Hauria de ser possible llogar racons on vam morir, sense interferències, sense bombones d'oxigen autopropulsades, despenjant-se per sorpresa sobre teu, just al darrer moment, on les mesures de seguretat et garantissin, t'asseguressin una mort com cal. En realitat, les mesures de seguretat són mesures de defensa de l'exterior, aquest torturador suprem. El món descarrega la seva toxicitat dins de la meva medul·la diàriament, m'assimila amb les seves infiltracions i no em puc permetre compartir malaguanyada medicació. I això, que les càpsules vermelles i grogues m'atrauen com flors, són un nèctar de mala vida, un beuratge substanciós. Qui sóc jo per rebutjar-lo? La meva germana diu que és feliç. Feliç! Aquesta paraula ja feia verdet el dia que em van parir. Quan diu feliç, soc molt feliç, diu, m'ensenya les dents. Em miren com ulls, les seves dents groguegen com el blanc dels ulls dels vells. I això que va deixar el cafè i el tabac abans de complir els 20 anys. Però el ruibos i el ioga també són addictius. Acidificadors i envellidors i addictius. Les coses sanes maten molt més lentament. Primer et deixen creure en el seu amor, t'obliguen a la seva intensitat esllanguida. Estem forçats a la palidesa durant dècades, en una de les quals ens solem reproduir. Quina jugada mestra! Imposar infantesa d'una manera tan irresponsable només pot ser un efecte secundari de la medicació. S'ha de ser tou com farciment per accedir a la vida i faixar cada nou fill, de cap a cap, amb la seda de la pròpia por, mare castradora per naturalesa, cheerleader incondicional. La força de la por és la suma de cada petit somni reduït a pols. Esnifar-lo, doncs, sembla que és l'única manera de viure el que ens queda, dissimular la nuesa posant-la en una dutxa i tot en pau. Beneïda sedació. Thank you.
Excellent. So very quickly, I'm going to read a translation by my dear friend, Julia Sanches Gomez. Safety precautions all over the place, more than people, more than rats. Precautions enacted without logic or sense. Safety precautions made concrete in guardrails, bulletproof windows, no trespassing signs, seatbelts, helmets, buttons, and blockades. Precautions that are active or passive, whatever. Knee pads, for example, or foam floor tiles. Zippers, condoms, riot police, and football, unemployment benefits and medication, precautions that are subtle or obvious, electromagnetic brakes, prisons, banners, social integration initiatives, scaffolding, valves, fireproof cladding, harnesses, and carabiners. And again, medication, hard hats, 2% milk, medication, medication, and medication. A successful suicide these days is heroic. The world is full of unconscionable people licensed in first aid. They're everywhere, gray and unassuming like female pigeons, but aggressive like mothers. They defy the deaths of others with cardiac massages, and careful Heimlich maneuvers. They're a pack of thieves. You can't even ram an olive pit down the wrong tube without them forcing you to spit it out, even if they break ribs or puncture lungs in the process. And there you are, covered in dry martini puke, the olive pit hurled like a trophy at the corner of the room. I wouldn't mind dying in a corner. It should be possible to rent corners for dying in peace without interferences or self-propelled oxygen tanks dropping down on you at the very last moment. Corners where safety precautions guarantee, where they assure you a proper death. In reality, safety precautions are security precautions against the outside world, the supreme torturer. The world unloads its toxicity daily into my core. Its discharges absorb me. But I can't allow it. I won't let myself partake. Wretched medication. Pills, red and yellow ones, lure me like flowers. A nectar for a life of vice, a nourishing concoction. Who am I to refuse? My sister claims she's happy. Happy. That word was already gathering verdigris by the time I was born. When my sister says the word happy, I'm very happy, she says. She bares her teeth. Her teeth gawk at me like eyes, jaundicing like the whites of elderly eyes. And mind you, she quit smoking and drinking coffee before she turned 20. But rooibos and yoga are also addictive, acidifying, aging, and addictive. Healthy things kill you much more slowly. They start by convincing you of their love and making you bow to their wilting intensity. For decades, we are committed to pallor, and in one of these decades, we reproduce. A stroke of genius. Such wretchless imposition of childhood can only be a side effect of medication. To enter life, you must be as soft as stuffing, every new child bandaged from head to toe in the silk of fear itself, an emasculating mother by nature, an unconditional cheerleader. The power of fear is the sum of every small dream reduced to dust. Let's snort it then. Looks like that's the only way left to live. To conceal nudity by shutting it away in the shower and being done with it. God bless sedation. Thank you all very much. I believe we're at the end of our program.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Ciao, Beatriz.
Thank you.
Ciao, Eva.
Benjamin, ciao, Eva. Nate.
Adiós.
Obrigada.